So, hey, Charles, how you doing?
I'm doing great, groovy, and feeling phenomenal. How you doing?
Excellent. Charles, of course, we know you as the progenitor, the man behind the first ever paranormal convention in Connecticut. But what we didn't realize was Carrie found it while she was doing her.
No, I knew.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, because of Dad.
Carrie didn't tell me till most of the way through her research on this episode for the Paul is Dead thing that you had been involved in this book.
So I've been a Beatles guy probably longer than I've been a monsters, horror, paranormal guy. And certainly, if not as a professional or whatever, but certainly as a fan, I'm old. So my first memory in life was seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. And I did live through the Paul McCartney death clues and the whole controversy behind it. And some years later, there was something else called Clat 2, which was a band that came out that was reported to be the Beatles. And similarly, there was radio stations that were playing all of a sudden this band saying, could this be the Beatles? And of course, it wasn't, just like, of course, Paul McCartney was not, in fact, dead.
That for Clat 2, that was a great marketing gimmick. That must have been really nice for them.
You know what? It not only projected them into the stratosphere of actual sales and national, knowledge of people knowing them, but I just spoke to Terry Draper from the band a week ago, and I'd never spoken to him before. But as you guys know, I published the book of top 10 horror lists.
Yes.
I'm working on a sequel called the book of top 10 Beatle lists. So I'm reaching out to not just celebrities, but people who have any kind of connection with the Beatles' history and legacy and involvement. And he was one of those people they thought, well, if he's around, I'd love to get a Beatles list from him. And he came through with a really cool top 10 list, which will eventually be in the book. So anyway, we're going in all kind of directions here. But when you think of conspiracy theories, which I love, but I rarely believe or try to push it on anybody. The Paul McCartney one is the biggest as far as music history, as far as pop culture. Here was someone who was the biggest rock star in the world and the biggest band of the world, who'd been on a farm, just sort of playing low key, and the word spread that he was dead. But oh my gosh, the clues were amazing. I mean, if you're a believer and you want to believe this stuff, it's so not that it's just easy to find the clues, but you can find clues that people didn't even come up with. Hands over someone's head as a foreign symbol of death. Just the most incredible things.
Do you remember where you were, or do you remember the first time somebody told you Paul McCartney was dead and that there was a guy faking Paul McCartney and the Beatles?
I mean, even as a kid, I laughed at it. I scoffed at it. And I said, this is ridiculous. At which point I grabbed all the albums and thought about, oh my God, wait, the walrus is Paul? And a walrus symbolizes death? Oh my God, look at all this. Is amazing. A station at that time, which was oldies forever, was called WDRC, the Big D. And they would play, stuff from the 50s and 60s a lot, and eventually the 70s. But I think they ran 48 straight hours of Beatles music. And we always thought, was there a genius behind this? Was John Lennon or one of the Beatle PR people so brilliant that they actually came up with this and sneaked out the word? Were they the Blair Witch Project of the time? And you guys can understand that association because, forever before the film came out, the promo was that this was a real thing. And, people got caught up in it. And even though the way we realized it wasn't, still that tiny either ounce of doubt or the fun of thinking that it might be. Now, there's no fun in thinking that McCartney was dead, but there was a lot of
mystery
fun.
of it all. It's
There was a lot of
clues and
yes, the clues were everything. And you would go back, beyond Pepper and Mystery Tour and the White Album and the places that were Abbey Road, my gosh, was the most obvious one with a Volkswagen that says 28 if.
Yep.
I mean, how could there be such amazing coincidences? It's just unbelievable.
Well, do you think that is a coincidence, or do you think the Abbey Road cover is all like playing into this stuff on purpose?
No, because the theory really started right after Abbey Road was released.
Wow.
So
correct.
Yeah.
So now have that come out afterwards, and then we could say, oh my gosh, Derek Taylor, their PR rep or one of their brains behind things, took advantage of it, ran with it, flowed with it. Album sales. Let me tell you, album sales increased like crazy with the Paul McCartney Death Clues. All of a sudden, people were buying either albums they had and had given up or lost or threw away, or figured, oh wait, we've got Meet the Beatles. We better get Abbey Road and see all these clues. So it served as an amazing propeller for sales, even though that wasn't, I don't believe, intentional and wasn't anyone's brilliance.
Great time for a sales propeller too. It's right when the band's breaking up that all this stuff is happening.
To end an album with The End, to have on a brick wall gunshots to the number 3, to have
Beatles.
to have 3 Beatles left, the 3 Beatles, to have them, walking as if it's a funeral procession with, of course, the one who would be buried in a suit, barefoot, as you might bury, so it's just unbelievable. And now, so a dear friend of mine who passed away, he was a professor in Maryland. His name was Joel Glazier. Joel was the world's expert on this.
Yeah, I got his research a couple times in my readings.
Oh, yeah, to the point that there was a Beatles fanzine. Before I ever published Good Day Sunshine, there was a magazine called Strawberry Fields Forever, which came out of Boston. And there was a whole issue on the clues, but he prepared slideshows. He prepared a whole presentation on this before there was PowerPoint. And I had him as a guest at an early Beatles convention at Southern Connecticut State University. And his hour presentation was packed. You didn't hear a pin drop in the audience. People were agog. Is that a good word? Listening to every word he said. But it got out of hand. The last 15 minutes went beyond the Death Clues to the point of, he said, he would say things, and this is just, we can do a whole nother story on this. I don't believe in any of these conspiracies, but if you take the conspiracies to their extreme, there's another conspiracy that Yoko Ono sold her soul to the devil to be ingratiated with John Lennon and the Beatles, and that the final payoff would come when John Lennon was killed in 1980. And that was the payoff from the devil. So there's a lot of other conspiracies that, only the real inside Beatle fans know about, but it's the Paul McCartney Death Clues that we're talking about. And that is probably the most, and you can say it's fun now that we know it. Paul is with us still, thank goodness. At the time, it wasn't fun. And I think it took, was it Look magazine or Life magazine, to actually find him and send a reporter out to his farm in Scotland and show him. And he, people still had the doubts because he was bearded and scraggly. And in those days, there wasn't an internet. There wasn't Twitter. There wasn't Instagram. There wasn't, what's DMZ, whatever it's called. TMZ. Yeah. To keep track of where celebrities are every second of their lives.
It's an important service that we need. Thank God those people are out there.
So if he'd been out of the public eye for a few months, well, we knew he was in a car accident a little while before that, chipped his tooth. In fact, this is way before it, because if you look at the videos for a Rain and Paperback Rider, he's trying not to smile, but when he smiles, you see the chipped tooth from the accident. And people, well, that was maybe when the new guy came in. And the new guy was, supposedly named William Campbell. Mm-hmm. But they referred to him, Pepper, as his pseudonym is Billy Shears. So let me introduce to you the one in all the years, and it's Billy Shears. And it's funny, and if you think about it that way, it's just hysterical that people would have believed that there was this guy from England who not only looked exactly like Paul McCartney, but could play bass lefty, could sing, could have the talent, could put out an amazing solo album shortly after. It's so ridiculous, but it's still funny and genius.
Have you met people? I mean, I'm not sure if Mr. Glazer believed in it wholeheartedly, but have you met people in your Beatles travels who really believe this conspiracy?
The same people who probably believe that Twin Towers was brought down by America, and I don't want to get political. There are still people who believe it, and then they'll say, "Well, just listen to the album Driving Rain, and that'll prove it." That's just a solo album reference that wasn't probably one of his best reviewed. Yeah. And so then I wonder, wait, are you saying this tongue in cheek, or do you actually still believe? Joe Glazer was really a Beatle brain, and he was one of these people who collected so much stuff. He, as you guys probably know, I do the Beatle tours to Liverpool every single summer, and I've been bringing fans over since '83. And he came over a few times, and I think he did his presentation in Liverpool once, and it kind of got booed. It was really weird. It was taken so differently. People actually got offended, and he had to say, "No, I don't believe this." He said, "I do not believe this is true. I'm presenting it as the plausibility that people who are believing it, how it's presented. It's not true. Here are the clues. So you got to know this is not true." He had to really go out and say that and make a big point of it.
Yeah, I think the difference to me might be that America, we love crime and kind of drama and stuff like that. And we're all a little bit morbid in our curiosity about things. We like being kind of titillated by these creepy things. And I think in England, it probably hit closer to home, especially in Liverpool. I mean, people might have actually thought he was dead for a bit and might have known him or his family, or it might have been, more emotional for them, whereas we were more separate and we could kind of just have fun with the clues.
Great call. Right. It was a good word. We were titillated by it, and they were, it was probably hit a little closer to home with people who either grew up with them or sons of maybe parents who saw him at the Cavern and were in the audience. Right. Good call.
Did you find yourself, did you ever play your records backward to try to hear the back? This is, of course, at the beginning of the backmasking.
Obviously. Yeah. Guys, we call, our record players in those days were gramophones, because I'm 100 years old. But no. I remember
wax cylinder, you would twist that around the other way.
I had a kiddie one. We had a family one that was built into the furniture. So it was a TV, and it was a record player, and then a bar. I mean, this was a big deal probably in 1960, whatever, when the TVs came out. It's a black and white TV. And I remember that I could play the Sound of Music on that, and Man of La Mancha, and Hebrew music, and I could play maybe, I don't know what, but I could play Beatles if it was the early stuff that my parents, but if it was the Chipmunks do the Beatles, or we're getting into Pepper and that, I had to play it on my own Victrola. That was the word, Victrola. And I broke my Victrola going backwards because it wasn't made to do that.
Yeah,
it was this little
so many people had to rebuy their albums too, because they destroyed them doing that. So of course, again, more
marketing schools. Again.
Yeah. Was there any?
Before you ask me, and then it was you hearing what you thought you wanted to hear, because you're not hearing "I Buried Paul," you're hearing "Cranberry Sauce" or "I'm Very Bored." But when you listen to it over and over, well, maybe it could say that, or "Turn Me On, Dead Man." Turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man. Who's going to say turn me on, dead man? It's not. It's just gibberish or whatever it was. And when you play it backwards and you want to hear, turn me on, dead man, it could have said, Dennis Rodman had a great rebound. You could really think of what it would say and make your brain think it's saying that.
And what I was saying when we were talking about this, we just watched Get Back on Disney Plus for 8 hours, and John Lennon is being very silly in the studio the whole time. He's saying weird stuff all the time. Of course, he's going cranberry sauce, Yeah, he thinks that's funny, and he's just being silly in the studio. Yeah.
Are you diehard fans? How did you or casual fans? I want to know because I think there's a difference between the diehard fans' appreciation of Get Back and the casual fans' tolerance of it.
Yeah, I agree with you completely.
I'm definitely a diehard fan. I would probably say you are too.
Me too. Yeah. We're both big fans.
I cried multiple times, so I was very into it. I loved it.
Yeah, we were spellbound, and as a musician, I was spellbound by the whole thing. Getting to basically sit in band practice with the Beatles for 8 hours is, the greatest.
I watched it and I said, please, I want to see another 8 hours.
Yeah.
People are saying, oh, it's too much playing, don't let me down. No, please. That's like saying the Beatles are overrated. No, they're underrated. And there wasn't a second of boredom in the whole 8 hours. I truly loved it. And I congratulate not only Peter Jackson and the powers that be that made this new release happen, but God bless Michael Lindsay Hogg and all those people who put up, a dozen cameras and recorded everything in a time that, pre Big Brother and pre, Bachelor and all that stuff where it's commonplace. I mean, we're talking about candid camera territory, Alan would have been proud.
And Peter Jackson did a beautiful job with that footage too. I mean, it looks, or whoever he had scrub it looks like it was shot yesterday. It's
pretty remarkable too. He was allowed to use that footage. Most directors, I don't think, would say, "Oh, you can do a different version of the movie I already made." That probably took a lot of putting the ego to the side, I would say.
I think that Let It Be shouldn't go away. I mean, that should also be there because it's a version of it. And it's, one, I don't say one person, but one version of what it was like. And I think we could have taken this stuff and edited it the same way. And it could have been even more harsh. I mean, Paul McCartney saying to George Martin, I'm talking to John, like, get the F out of here. That was, whoa, I didn't know they would talk to George Martin that way. I see him as the reverence. I see him as that, father-like figure. And they, they showed who was boss there. So you could have even cut it, I think, harsher than Let It Be. Oh, you get to see John. You get to see Paul dismiss George pretty dismissively too a couple of times. Obviously to George's chagrin.
But he's also going through a lot. There's a point where he's almost like crying. It's very, very intense.
Yes.
Yeah. And I had never seen them as people younger than me. I grew up watching their movies.
Right.
So I always thought of them as older than me. So having the perspective of someone older than them being like, oh, these were just kids with all this responsibility and all this craziness going on.
So Paul at 28 he was like 40, 50.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't, I mean, I don't think I was that mature and astute and just genius. It's scary how the world's and the stars and the planets aligned so correctly with those four, and it was the right time, the right individuals, that right combination of music, personality, brilliance, and to see Ringo play piano so definitely, and John move over to lead and to play whatever that, I don't, you tell me what it's called when he's on and he's doing the slide guitar on that. What is?
That's a Hawaiian lap steel guitar.
Who would think? We all know Paul can play every instrument. That plate behind you. You hand him that, he'll find a way to make it musical, right?
Yeah.
We knew that about Paul. But to see John, multi-talented, to see, George drum to the piano, to see Ringo on the piano, that was great because you didn't see a lot of Ringo in that. You saw Ringo just trying to stay awake.
But I loved every moment of Ringo, though, when George was like, well, I don't want to go on the roof. And Ringo was like, well, I want to go on the roof. Like,
right. Well, I was proud of Ringo, right? Proud proud of the guy. He actually stood up and said, I do want to go on the roof.
And thank goodness, because we got that great rooftop concert too.
Oh,
It was funny seeing the police, trying to shut it down and thinking, God, what would I do if I was sent to shut down the Beatles concert? I don't think I could do it.
Two things coming out of that. One is, wow, you couldn't expect better publicity than the policeman coming up and shutting it down.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that wasn't planned. It's like the Paul is Dead album sales is not planned. See how I segued back into that. But the other thing, the other takeaway is, do you remember how reluctant they were to do it because they didn't have 14 songs to do, like the full album, full concert?
Yeah.
They got the out after the 6 or 7, so whatever it was, number of songs that they did. Oh, well, we got it done. We're done. The cops are stopping us from doing it, And I loved Apple's staff. Did all the right things. They said, well, first let me get somebody. Well, tell me first, then let me get somebody.
Yeah, who is it?
It was like calling the cable company on the phone. There's just a dozen transfers.
Give me retention. Poor Brenda, or whoever the secretary's name was, just going like, oh, yes, I think they're going to be down in a minute. Yeah, I don't know why they're recording on the roof. I'm not sure.
She deserved a raise after that one.
And we grew up hearing about this guy who was the Beatles' like best friend and roadie, and the big teddy bear Mal Evans, who he plays the anvil on Maxwell Silverhammer, and we never really got to see him except for pictures, photos, and boy, was he dedicated. They needed, a pill fell on the floor, he'd be on the ground looking for anything in the world. He was there for them. And we just heard today that his memoirs, which he had written out and his family was holding back for many years, are finally going to come out. An author, is aligned with his family. And so we'll be seeing his memoirs hopefully within the next few years.
Wow.
And it'll be interesting to hear his point of view. I'm pretty sure he was there when the Beatles met Elvis. So some of the things that, are only conjecture, will actually, hear firsthand finally.
Some great stories there. It was also so cool seeing that rooftop concert, because the energy was just, the people hadn't seen the Beatles live in years, right? Since late 1966. So that also puts you in mind of, like, as we were doing this Paul is Dead conspiracy episode, was part of this, like, people just reaching out for, like, well, why haven't we seen the Beatles in 2.5 years? Why don't they?
It has to be a reason besides they just don't want to.
They're the best band ever. They're my favorite band. Why don't they tour anymore? Why do they hide themselves away and make music and we don't see them in public?
Well, it was pretty public that they, weren't going to tour again. They made that, pretty clear. And even when, it was suggested to them that they do those, Coliseum-esque places in the Middle East, no, we're not doing that. But there had to be that one little something special. And the rooftop was it. It was brilliant. And they were reluctant, I don't think, given another day or two, maybe John and George would have said, no, we're not doing it. So forget it. They got him at the right, it just magical. And I think that Disney or whoever planned the promotion of this 8-hour, 3-part set was very clever. One was, the part of it ending where George is leaving. I mean, there's drama. You now have conflict.
Oh yeah.
And it's not the conflict of the Beatles themselves arguing, because that's ancient history. It's the conflict of an actual drama. I mean, there's a plot here. And then the next plot is, do they finish their recordings and do they have enough for an album? And then the final one is, will they be recording on a stage? Will they be recording? Will they be doing a live performance? Where will it be? And it finally, as we all know, was the rooftop. And I think that was portrayed a little differently with the Police, because if I remember Let It Be, and I haven't seen it in about 4 or 5 years, and I do have the DVD somewhere, a bootleg of it, I think it's more of a pattern of they're coming up the steps, the show ends, and it's more like the Police made this end. Whereas here, well, it was kind of time to end, and the Police are there, so we might as well. Who was it that changes the lyrics about the Police up there?
Yes, and
great.
And they finally sort of allow the police up there at the end. Just as that one businessman is also coming to complain about the cameras on his roof that they've just snuck up there without permits.
Could you ever do any of that nowadays? Just go up to a rooftop and just sniper all these cameras everywhere. It's a terrible word to use, but that's pretty much what they're doing. It
would never see the light of day, and maybe one of your cameramen will get shot by a police sniper before you were done.
Right. And it's instant arrests, instant.
Yes.
The fact that it's the Beatles, you would think lends a little bit of royalty that maybe they're above reproach, just a hair, but not when there's that schmuck saying, it's ruining my business. Get him the hell. I can imagine if this was in New York, what those voices were, get him the F off there. How dare they? Now, I know Savile Row very well, having brought groups there for so many years.
Of course.
And on one year, one of our travelers left us, and we said, we don't know where this guy is. We lost him during the tour. Comes back at night, for dinner, and he said, I got up there. We're what?
How?
What does that mean? He somehow got on the roof. I don't know who he bribed. This was in the 80s, so you'd stop. It's now at Abercrombie and Finch store, by the way. And that whole block is really upper end, haughty-taughty designer shops, fashion, tailors. And that's what Savile Row is most known for, tailors. So I get it. There's these older people, and this did disrupt their business. But someone should have just said, it's the Beatles. It's going to be done soon. One day of your 50-year business, let it ride, and he probably would have said, no. You don't know what he said, but it's a great bit because you're asking all these people their opinion, and you're getting a great snapshot of London 1960. You're hearing them say, oh yeah, it's the Beatles, and of course I love them, or my gosh, yeah, I know it's them, but I haven't heard from them. You're hearing a lot of different fans' perspectives.
There was one hipster, one college guy going like, no, I don't care. They're rubbish. They've changed completely. I like their old records.
You're always going to get, and there's a girl who's like, oh, they're all right. And it's, you watch it with hindsight, like, this is historic. Like, what are you talking about?
And then,
but
you wonder if these people are still around. Boy, it would have been great to do an epilogue with those people on the streets. Who could find them? Hopefully they'll come forward themselves. But how would it have been, I love the, how they Woodstocked the the on the roof session.
Yeah, like the 6 boxes at one point. They had
multiple
4
boxes.
too. Yeah.
So how about an epilogue with these people saying their little stupid things that they said when they're interviewed on the streets, with the now knowledge, in their, in their wheelchairs, hopefully remembering what they said in those days. That would make for an amazing addition. Peter Jackson, wherever you are, let's make that the CD extras, the DVD bonus.
Absolutely. Part 4 coming soon.
So before we wrap up, I want to ask, what is your favorite Paul is Dead clue? What's the one that made you really creeped out when you listened to it or saw it when you were younger, when this whole thing was going on?
It's probably the For Walking the Street, because there's a whole picture there. There's the Volkswagen 28F, there's the blur in the corner. There's a lot of things, but I didn't realize that could have been a funeral procession. So when the clues came out, I don't think that was one of the earlier clues. I think everyone was playing things backwards and trying to hear it in the music. And they were pulling out, you're pulling out Mystery Tour. There was so many. I'm sorry.
Well, the missing shoes certainly are the most obvious. Like, whoa, why is he missing his shoes?
So one is dressed as a gravedigger. One is dressed as the preacher. One is the holy man. And then there's Paul dressed as maybe someone might be buried in a suit, right? Without shoes. Well, yeah, okay. He admitted, I took off my shoes. It was a warm day. There's so many pictures, of them doing it multiple times where he is wearing shoes. And there's this woman on the street who would just happen to be there, who's fixing them up and making sure they look good. Just, a woman off the street. There's a lot of outtakes from that photo session. But you know what? It so much adds to the whole mystique of, the greatest band ever had the greatest, conspiracy theory of ever, and the greatest, way of selling albums unintentionally ever.
Absolutely.
And the fact that we're talking about it in 2021, it just shows the strength of not just the band and their staying power, but the fact that something as silly in retrospect as reported death that wasn't there could have mushroomed and ballooned and exploded and continued to this day that we talk about it is just unbelievable.
Yeah, Gary, what's your favorite clue?
That's really hard. I love all the ones on Sergeant Pepper because there's so many, like on the album cover.
Yes.
And it, if you look at it, it kind of does look like a funeral. So there are certain things it's like, yeah, I could see that, So that's the kind of stuff that I like the best.
The cemetery setting, and the fact that the Stones are there and they're like still there, but the Beatles weren't, and that there's four of them are on the back, but Paul isn't facing. Pepper's got amazing ones.
Yeah.
It's pointing to a time of day.
Wednesday morning at 5:00. That's when it happened.
That's when we lost Paul.
Yeah. So before we go, do you want to tell us a little bit about your book and where we can find it?
I'm going to tell you about everything. If people want to go on a Beatle tour to Liverpool with me,
yes.
We do it every summer. We go during Beatle week and we go to London. That's like the appetizer. Then we go to Henley, where was George's home, his really quaint village. And then we spend an entire week in Liverpool and just do it all. It's the long and winding road from beginning to end. And it's Beatle, liverpooltours.com. I almost forgot my website.
One of your many.
liverpooltours.com. And I can tell you that we're, doing another book called the Book of Top 10 Beatle Lists, and then will hopefully be on sale in 2022. But for now, us horror lovers and people who love pop culture,
yes.
There's nine Beatle chapters in here, believe it or not, because I got lists from Pete Best, the Beatles drummer before Ringo, from Julia Baird, John Lennon's sister, and I don't want to give away them all, but in the Book of Top 10 Horror Lists, we've got lists from a Beatle, from a McCartney, from a Lennon sister, from a Karloff, from William Shatner, from one of the Monkees. I'm reading it off the back.
That's awesome.
From five rock and roll Hall of Famers. And if you go to Book of Top 10 Horror Lists, and it's 10 with the number 10.com, you can order it and I'll sign a copy and I'll personalize it to Ain't It Scary.
What a great idea for a book. Charles, you couldn't rattle off your top 10 horror movies, could you? Just real quick.
So I'm saving that for the sequel because
okay, all right.
No, but because in this book of top 10 horror lists, I cheated. I'll be honest. I wanted to have a list, but instead of putting my top 10 favorite horror movies, I put my top 10 favorite horror films that I was in.
Oh, great.
You guys know I do a lot of acting.
Yes,
so
of course.
my favorite roles with a scene from each. And I thought that would be, the intro tells how I fell in love with horror and how I grew up, with my mom showing me my first horror movie, blah, blah, blah. So there's a really fun intro. And then the outro, the ending is my list. So it's sort of bookends and makes it a little more personal. But I can tell you that The Exorcist is number one.
Excellent.
Absolutely. That's a great one.
Can you tell me yours before we go?
My favorite straight horror movie?
Or gay, straight or gay, whichever you
I think it's The Thing, probably. John Carpenter's The Thing.
Oh.
Is just so gross and cool and unlike anything else.
Let's look who picked that, because we have this amazing index.
Oh, there's an index.
Yeah, this ain't no comic book, baby. the Thing. So 1982's The Thing. Is that the year it was? Because they don't have the original here. So Sharon Farrell, who's a horror actress, Ian Lloyd, the lead singer of the Stories, who sang Louie, 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 Louie.
Great.
And Dinky Dawson, who you may not know, but was one of the real great rock producers. And he was a sound man in England at the time, but came over to America and did Mamas and the Papas and Fleetwood Mac. And I left him in because his list was so amazing. So we know The Thing from Another World was a 1951 sci-fi,
Yes.
and about 15 people picked that, but
Wow.
those three picked The Thing.
You and Dinky, Sean.
More people picked the original. That's so interesting.
Well,
John
Well,
Carpenter.
it's also, I think I had a lot of older pop culture people. So it might also be, era themed. If someone is, in their 70s and they're in the book,
Sure.
Ruth Buzzy isn't going to pick, A Quiet Place. She's going to pick Nosferatu, for example.
Yeah.
She was
What's
a big
yours?
Babadook fan, I heard.
Mine is Halloween, another John Carpenter. I think it's just classic. It started the whole slasher thing, which I love. It doesn't have any blood in it, and it's still very frightening. And I really appreciate especially the making of, knowing how little budget they had, I've done things that they had to do. I had to get a garbage bag full of leaves that had fallen and throw it and then collect it again for a shot, just like they did. So I really appreciate what they did with so little and how incredible it is even to this day. So that's always going to be my number one, I think.
So we talk generational, and you guys, compared to me, are younger. Not much, but a little. And I mentioned this because my kids who are 15 and 16 just saw the most recent 2 Halloweens.
Mm-hmm.
They loved them both, and they understood the difference. And then they watched the first John Carpenter, and they appreciated it, but they didn't enjoy it as much.
Yeah, especially younger, it gets harder because the style is just so different now.
That's right. All right. So for Halloween, I'm just going to give you a few.
I want to know
of the people who picked it. But before I do, I will tell you that what even got a pick was 2007's Rob Zombie Halloween, because the actress Sybil Shepherd was in it, Sybil Danning, so she picked it because she was in it. But some of the people who picked that were William Shatner.
No,
and you know why, right?
Oh, because of the mask.
Yeah,
the mask, of course. Jack Ketchum, who's no longer with us, one of the great horror writers of all time, picked it. Pete Best picked it, the Beatles drummer. Country artist Tim Atwood, and Gary Puckett, the singer from Gary Puckett.
Oh, I love Young Girl. That's one of my favorite songs.
Really?
Yeah.
So about a dozen people picked it, but those are some of the highlights of the people who picked Halloween. Great deservedly so.
What a great idea for a book. That's fascinating. I love it, Charles. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed being on. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Have a great holiday. Let me know when this is on so I can share it.
Yeah, that'll be up soon.
Sounds great.
Awesome.
Right.
Thanks, Charles. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.